Find people to play music with. Form a band. I think power comes out of doing something before you think about somebody else giving you the means to do it.
Brandon, it's great to have you here. I have heard you in so many different situations in the course of my travels. As I hear you play, you are always giving 110%, but you play such a wide variety of styles and different situations. It really, really amazes me at the consistency that you play at. Where did music start in your life?
When I was 5, my mom, who was a piano major until she had me actually in college, and she played alto sax a little bit in high school, and my dad was a music lover, from the time he was a kid. So he started putting a record collection together. She was teaching me piano at 5, and then we were driving around in the family car. We'd hear the top 40 radio. So I'd hear all the Beatles tunes, and she'd buy me a book of Beatles songs on the piano. So that was kind of the first time that she remembers me reading the music on the piano and reading the melody and saying, "But Mom, that's not what I heard on the radio." So that was kind of a good early lesson about the ear's rule.
Boy, listening is first, for sure. So you had music in the household? You started with
I did.
piano?
Yeah, I started on piano, then I played violin at 8 for a year. Couldn't do the vibrato, so that just didn't register with me. And my folks were going out to garage sales and swap meets and picking up instruments just on the weekends as kind of a collection. So they would put all these on the wall outside my bedroom. And I'd come home from school and I would see maybe something, a different instrument this week. So wow, I'll pick that one and make some noise on that. So they heard all my experimentation with different instruments, trombones, guitars. There was a drum kit up there, just everything you could imagine, clarinets and flutes. And
what a brilliant exposure for parents to do.
Yeah, it was great. And then they finally came home with an alto one day, and that was the one that really clicked.
So you picked it up and you felt that was your voice.
I don't know if I felt it was my voice. It was probably easier to play early on, or it just connected with me. So I do think it's a relatively easy instrument to get started on, not to master necessarily. But
so did you start taking lessons on it? Was it?
Not right away. Most of it was playing along with the radio. Just kind of figuring out. It was a pretty quick study to match the notes on the page with the horn. And then when I was in high school, then I did have a great band director who actually was connected with some of the pros in the area in Orange County, and he hooked me up with a teacher. And I didn't take very many lessons at all before I quit to play tennis, because he was a great sax player, but I just didn't connect with that side of it, being his student. So, but all these years later, I have several colleagues that all came up in Orange County, and they all studied with this guy. And very
How interesting. But you say playing along to the radio. On the radio, there was a kind of a wide variety of music that was being played, right? So you were kind of getting an influence at that time.
Yeah, I would pick out if there was a sax solo on something. I remember hearing Me and Mrs. Jones. There was an alto solo on that was great, and I kind of picked that out, and anything that kind of came along that resonated. So this would be about 65, 66, and then a little late. I'm not sure when Me and Mrs. Jones came out, but it just caught my ear. And then I also, if I heard a melody I liked, I would pick that up and play. So it wasn't instrument specific, So I was kind of aware early on with the groove factor and harmony and melody. But the melody was, what I was kind of looking to get the influence from as far as nuance, to be able to match when you hear somebody sing a great melody and then it kind of morphs into this a solo, like a sax solo or guitar solo, whatever is going to happen. And I've always been thrilled by how a instrumental solo can take off from that melodic line from a singer and kind of connect the dots. That was really interesting to me at an early age.
Well, what great ear training that is. That really is fantastic.
Yeah, I think it's something that maybe gets lost a little bit. So it helps keep us in the moment.
Totally in the moment.
So you're always paying attention to what's going on around you, and you're always paying respect to what the song's about.
Yeah, fantastic. So where'd you get into professional playing now?
When I was in high school, well, let's say the first inklings I had that this could be something that could be fun and also profitable. Well, they had a pep band, they called them, and we used to play the basketball games. So that was fun because then it wasn't as regimented as a marching band or a concert band, and we were reading these little sheets that you put into your lyre on the instrument, and there was a lot of Dixieland, and then you'd flip the page and there would be some transcription of a rock tune that was out right, at that time.
Yeah.
And so we'd play those songs, and it was great for me because I did have kind of a connection with what I'd heard on the radio if it was the popular music. And then the other stuff, you would just you'd pick it up along the way and you'd get exposed to Dixieland. And right around that time, I also was accepted in one of the jazz bands at Santa Ana College. So they were allowing some of the high school kids they thought were good enough to be in these night bands they had. So that was another good experience.
Well, how fantastic. I mean, I remember the pep bands as a drummer. We played
Yeah.
them. It was so much fun. And it was a wide variety of music just to kind of create the energy
Yeah.
for the sports game that was going on. The school music programs, how helpful was that for you growing up?
I'll tell you, across the board, teachers are so important. This one band director, he really made a difference. He was on a handful of people that really were influential. He was just a dynamo of energy. He was a young guy. He had long hair. He was a trumpet player who had traveled, I think, with Bill Chase.
Yeah.
His name's Phil Tauber. Really, and we're in contact, to this day. And one of the best thrills of my life, because he only lasted about a year and a half in this school.
Yeah.
And they were a very marching-oriented system. So this guy comes in and he's got ideas for that week's halftime show, and he walks over to the blackboard and he starts drawing out, this wild fantasy of, us in costumes as cowboys and Indians, and the drum major being, going up and going to sleep. And then this is a dream that happens on the football field. So I'm a freshman in high school and I'm seeing this. I'm going, wow, this is kind of cool. This is very creative. And it sure beat putting that little tight shako on my head, which I'm sure exacerbated the hair loss. But he was just so exciting, and he also put the first jazz band together that the school had. So it was kind of all these early experiences in my first year and a half of high school.
What's amazing about it is that the music programs, as many artists that I've interviewed have talked about how positive it is, we're losing it now in the school systems, and we're losing that advantage of having that inspiration. Like you said, it made a difference.
Yeah, we lost it even in my school after he was gone. The person that replaced him was not as inspiring, and she had her own focus about how she wanted to present music. And I always felt a little resistant, let's say, against the regimentation of it. And I didn't think it was as creative. It was pretty much, here's the music, play what's on the page. Not as much connection with listening and the whole aura of what music should be and what makes it exciting to me.
Fantastic. You mentioned Bill Chase.
Yeah.
And what I like about these interviews is that people that are watching it, when you hear a name like Bill Chase, just don't let that name go by.
Yeah.
Do the research to find out who Bill Chase was, and just a phenomenal musician, that what he offered in the music industry. So these are names that influenced you to a certain degree.
Yeah, if I was interested, then I would do the homework.
Right.
And that's really what I think one of the best attributes we can have is curiosity.
Yeah.
And then the ability to be moved
Yeah.
is primary as well, because you have to be, excited to be able to do what you do.
So that curiosity to spark that emotion.
Yeah.
And that will draw people in. It's a very important quality
Yeah.
that you have for sure, because you're still curious at what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And I have more appreciation of music that maybe I was a little dismissive of when I was younger. So I think, if anything, I've broadened my listening scope, and I have more appreciation of the personal quality of artists that maybe it wasn't my cup of tea when I was a kid. And these days, you can really recognize that these were individuals.
Yeah.
And they had their own sound, and there was a lineage of that too. So to be respectful of the lineage of any music that interests us, and you realize, wow, this guy took from this, and it's just kind of this never-ending tree of information that if you're excited by it, you tap into it.
Absolutely. Who would you say some of your influences in music were and are?
Well, the Beatles' influence was strong as a kid. And then my mom was going and getting records from the library, and she would bring these home and record them on this reel-to-reel recorder that my dad had, so that we could have them for posterity.
Yeah.
And I was exposed to a lot of Motown records. I remember she brought home Nights in White Satin. So really cool. I was exposed more to that side of music, and I heard the beauty of production at that point, and records that you could dive into, and they were very ambient and vibey at that time. And then later I was exposed to more jazz recordings, but early on it was more the pop and the funk. And then when I was 15 and playing in that college band, I met some guys in that band that worked for their dad, who was a roofer in Santa Ana, and they had a weekend band, and they were called Los Chicos. And so they invited me to play with them, and that was the first time I ended up on gigs and started making some money. And you're playing for quinceañeras and these Latin parties that were just. That was also a huge thrill because I had not done any tuxedo Beverly Hills style casuals, we call them, where you could set up and play one chorus of "Girl from Ipanema." If you go into a second chorus, the guy next to you is hitting your leg because you got one chorus only. So you realize the limitations of certain avenues of expression. And those parties were so fun, and they didn't care as long as the band was grooving and they were up dancing. They loved long solos. They were responsive. They were very much present, and they were appreciative of musicians on stage. So that was a great early lesson. So Latin stuff and then funk.
That explains why you have this incredible wide variety of people that you have performed with, which is really amazing. I mean, that's not that common to have that wide an area. So were there any specific sax players that you were listening to at all? Or?
So early on, I was aware of Paul Desmond because we had, my study was at least I'd be exposed to certain players. And I think my mom also picked up a Paul Desmond transcription from Take 5, something like that. So I was aware of that. But that I didn't appreciate that as much as I do now, which leads to a very important point about acknowledging that we are here now and to play music, no matter how much respect we're paying to the past. Yeah. We need to bring that forward,
right,
and make sure that we're not stuck in the past. So that was music that was important and born of that time.
Yeah.
So any music we create now should be born of our time.
How beautiful to play in the moment, in the now. Be influenced, but be in that moment.
Influenced and respectful, and also irreverent sometimes too. That also plays into it. The ability to go off and follow these creative tangents.
That is fantastic. Paul Desmond, you mentioned Paul Desmond.
Yeah, so Paul Desmond was very important. And then I heard my dad had some Earl Bostic records, who was not that well known in my circle, but he prided himself, my dad, on collecting these series. So he had like a whole King record series of Georgie Auld and Earl Bostic. Now, to be honest with you, I didn't really get into those records until a little later as a part of research. And I also worked for a record store. So that was one of the best experiences to just for a thirsty guy to go in there every day and find some. You go to the jazz, selection because there's only be one album of each artist.
Oh, that's
but there would be
fantastic.
a lot of artists, and you could pick them out and play them in the store and really get an education that way.
Fantastic. You were thirsty and you were in the well.
Yeah, I was absolutely.
Really.
So then I think when I was about 17. I went on my first little road trip with a trombone player, a friend of mine that was in the band, and we had some family friends that were in Balboa Park area of San Diego. Yeah. So I was living in Orange County with my folks, and we went on this road trip down there to see Chicago and Santana in concert in Balboa Park. So I was already, a neighbor had turned me on to Chicago, so I really liked the energy of the first Chicago record. And it was kind of a beautiful combination of jazz and rock.
Yeah.
The energy of both. And Santana was great, but the music that really flipped me out that day was what they played before the first band went on stage and what they played between acts. And I don't even remember who opened and who closed. But the album was Billy Cobham's Crosswinds record on Atlantic. And that was the first time I heard Mike Brecker play. And that turned my world around. So that was, here was a guy that, wow, this guy, I get goosebumps even talking about it because he just had that kind of guitar influence and vocal influence, and the way he was bending notes. That I said, wow, I've never heard a sax player play like that.
Boy, Mike Brecker, there's a name that, again, for this generation to go back and really research Michael Brecker. I had a chance to meet him many times.
Yeah.
Billy's a dear friend of mine, and just to hear him play and how deep Mike was all the time when he played.
Yeah.
You have that quality. You really have that intensity in the moment in every note that you play. Where do you think that came from? Is that just a combination of everything, or was there specific guys that you were learning from?
Well, yeah, I think that the influences are huge. It kind of sets up your dynamic range and what you look for in your own performances and those you're playing with. So for me, after that concert, then I went to a store, and I was right around, I graduated in 75 from high school, so the Brecker Brothers, their first album had come out, which featured Dave Sanborn as a part of the horn section. So on so many levels, it was high quality ensemble playing with really powerful improvisation that was blues and rock influenced as much as it was jazz influenced. And at that particular time, Mike probably had more John Coltrane influence than Sanborn did, but Sanborn had this more bluesy, funky thing that influenced. So I just loved how they influenced each other at that time, and I've always hung on to that type of camaraderie amongst players as being something to really achieve.
That's fantastic. Where'd you go from there then? Now you're
So
playing?
yeah, so I'm playing in kind of those styles, and I even had a nickname, Brandborn, when I was in Orange County, and I was playing in some of these bands and learning, solos, and I'd mimic as much as I could off a record. And I wasn't actively writing, transcribing, but I was learning phrases and nuance and a lot of things, kind of connecting my ears more to the music. So then I got gigs through these various connections with top 40 bands. There was a Vietnamese guitar player in Orange County who was doing these really cheap recording sessions, but he would get guys like myself and Andy Martin, a great trombone player, and people that are pretty well known in the industry now amongst horn players.
Yeah.
That is, and we would do these gigs, and he would fly us to some other location to do a big beauty pageant where one girl would come out and he'd play Hendrix' Purple Haze because she'd be raw, all punked out, and then the next girl would come out like in some gown and we'd play Girl from Ipanema. So it's like that kind of diversity. I came back and I started getting top 40 gigs. So you're playing disco and all kinds of different dance music, heavy on funk if they had horns.
Yeah.
It was a lot in the R&B and funk. So I really appreciated those bands. And that kind of led, when I was home off the road from traveling with the top 40 bands, I would hit these junior colleges around so I get more reading experience. And then, of course, because there's so many horn players in there, you're meeting more people who are off doing other projects. And through one of these connections, I met a guy named Jim Stevenson who had a band, the first band I played with that was playing original material. I thought, this is something
Very
extra
different.
special, because now you're working with a band where their focus is playing their own music. They're not emulating. Their influences have influenced and inspired their writing, but they're not trying to copy anybody. Now you're trying to find your own way of expression.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And that's really important.
So finding their own voice as a band.
You have to find your own voice, and that kind of helps, I think, soloists like me. If you're so inspired by listening to people, now you're in a situation, okay, now you have to find your own thing to say.
So you're looking now for your own voice as the band is looking for their own voice.
Yeah, I think they're mutually beneficial.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yeah. So with the musicians that you're playing with, a variety of players that you have started to play with. So how did they get to the point where now you've built your profession into being called for all these different artists?
After the experience with that band, and that was done at a place called Studio Cafe in Newport Beach, and a lot of great players used to drive from LA to go drive down there and play. So I met some guys down there. Around that time, people were telling me about this club called the Baked Potato in Studio City. Okay. So I went up and I started hanging there and listening to the musicians and really being inspired. And I thought, okay, those are the guys that I want to play with.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of stuff I want to play. You're very inspired to play your own material in a club like this. Yeah. And it's really about having further development of these qualities that we're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And you're there playing with people that are finding their own voices and playing original material primarily. And if they're playing covers, and you've got unique arrangements of things, so you're really putting your own twist on it. So then I moved to the area kind of to be close to that, and realized that immediately that that was where the work was, and that all musicians had kind of gravitated toward this industry hub, because I think Los Angeles is the industry center for music, even though a lot of that music has changed. But there's a reason that this many musicians live in this town.
Yeah.
And it's because there is the most work in the industry, and that attracts the most talented musicians.
Absolutely.
And so then that kind of feeds. So then when you're doing these bread and butter gigs, and then at night you're out playing creative stuff. So it all fuels everything else. There's no, to be a studio musician can get kind of a bad rap.
Yeah.
Because people say, well, I don't really hear your focus. What's your direction? I said, all of it.
Yeah.
It's all. My direction is forward. It's being here, present, and interpreting everything around me, and putting my voice on that, but respecting the music and moving everything forward.
Fantastic. You really have a distinctive sound, and I know that takes years to develop that. But you were really conscious about wanting to have an individual sound. That's something that I think you really worked on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. To the point where I had to start diluting my influences. So, and that's where listening to all the other sax players came in. So after, if you start having nicknames about a particular player, then if you're smart, you go, okay, I got to like widen my influence scope here a little bit. And then start appreciating more of what everybody brings to the table. Just so I have a deeper well to draw from. Because, and then you find yourself in there too. You find your own thread in that lineage. And to be able to play things effectively, I may not prefer one particular style or way of playing, but if it has merit to me, I can do it for a little while, and I'll enjoy doing it. Like growling, for example, like a Clarence Clemens style growling tenor saxophone. That's good, even though it hurts your throat after a little while. But there is power in that. You realize how a lot of these different, a lot of them, they could be called gimmicks, or they could nuance or approach, or it could be somebody's thing. Oh, that's his thing. That's what he does. For me, they're just all parts of the grab bag.
Yeah, well, and that's a part of this bag of tricks that we end up developing in the course of our time. I had the chance, Jeff Porcaro had once told me, he said, Dom, you got to come down and you got to hear Brandon. And I went down to hear you with Toto years ago. And it was just amazing how just great, the sound of the band just sounded like they were in the studio on stage. It was an incredible listening skill that you all had at a very high level.
Well, thank you. That's exactly what I'm talking about, is to bring the discipline of the studio to the live stage, and vice versa, to bring the creativity of the live stage to the studio.
Absolutely, absolutely, brilliantly done. The business side of stuff like here, part of what happens in the sessions is we try and give these future students the chance to understand how we organize things. How do you organize the dates and schedules? Do you use technology? How do you map out the plan of all of this?
It's easier with technology now as far as being organized, at least for me. It's easier to keep things straight, and I've got information on my iPhone that talks to my iPad with my computer, so wherever I am, I can reference. If somebody calls me to work, I can let them know right then if I'm available. In the old days, it would be, I'm not sure, I have to get home, and first there were like pagers, and people would page you for work, and you have to find a phone somewhere and call them back, and so the technology has really come a long way.
It's come,
yeah. Although it is really good to see and have a visual sense. I was actually thinking about going back to one of the large desk calendars I used to have, so you really get everything laid out. And I think everything kind of has a power when you either write it down a certain way, and so I don't ever want to lose touch with the tactile sensation of writing your own music, because there are all these great programs, and definitely it's easier. But a lot of us have talked about this and said, well, there's a charm to somebody's manuscript if they're really adept at writing. And
that's fantastic. Teaching young saxophonists, are there ways of teaching them to widen their view of what they need to play in today's music?
I think all we can do is inspire people to find their own voice. And then along that way, you might throw I would throw ideas out, like you might listen to this person or that person, or how do you want to play? Most of my interaction is just helping them get a better sound so that they can, because I really think that sound leads everything. Sound is the first perception that we have when we hear music. And then if there's a beat that follows that, then it's, even the sound of a drum hit, you're hearing that sound of the drum before you're hearing any other follow-up beats that would construct a groove. So that's really important. I've always been so aware of that. And that's what inspired me to get my own studio together, just purely out of self-preservation, for lack of a better way to put it, because I was hearing myself on all these records and thinking, well, it's me. I'm playing the same mouthpiece, same reed, same instrument, and why does it sound so different from this record to this record? You realize how many ways that sound can be manipulated.
Interesting. Are there any younger musicians that you hear or younger horn players that you hear, up and coming guys that are just, or girls that are really starting to take your attention to them at all?
Yeah, there are quite a bit of creativity. I'm always amazed by the level of creativity that come out of a lot of the Berklee graduates. They're not hemmed in by any particular genre. They're not trying to recreate music from the 1920s or the 60s or 70s. They're just kind of honoring everything. They're honoring their own muse. And I feel that way about a lot of the players that have inspired me that have come out of that school. And that's not the only place. It just seems to be a lot of people coming out. And I find it interesting, the older I get, how many of my associates have gone to particular schools. And I only went to college for 1 year. And then I went on the road because I wasn't quite frankly inspired by my college situation at all.
Wow.
I was accepted with honors there. So it meant it was much cheaper for me to go to school. It was close to my folks' place in Orange County. So I went, but it wasn't the jazz program. I had friends like John Patitucci and Jim Cox and all these guys that were going to Long Beach State. You know, I had Eric Marenthal, my buddy from Newport Beach. He went to Berkeley. Doug Webb went to Berkeley. So there was this whole, kind of a deep scene even in Orange County.
Yeah.
But everybody's experiences were different.
Boy, again, these are deep, deep names that you're mentioning.
Yeah.
And I hope that the listeners research these names. What motivates you? What gets you up to be able to continue at this pace?
The idea that I can be more connected with everything. So that doesn't mean I'm always successful, and I still walk on some gigs that I walk out of there and I'm thinking, well, did I need to do that? But the vast majority are gigs now where I feel more connected than ever. When people really get it, and then you realize the power, and sometimes there's a focus. For me, it's, if I don't spend all my time in the studio, I like my playing better. If I spend more of my time on stage, I like my playing better. If I'm on the road, I like my playing better. And it's all about connecting myself to the instrument. And then if I'm in a band that is allowing this music to really fly, as opposed to walking in with a preconceived notion of how it's supposed to sound every night, or they're not looking for anything special, then I'm good. If it doesn't have to be my own band. As a matter of fact, I've had a lot more fun doing other people's gigs, as long as like I say, they're like-minded and they really want you to fly. If they want to hear me play, then I'm good.
Fantastic. In closing, imagine these younger students and people that have this really desire to want to be in the music industry, for whatever instrument they play or whatever involvement in the industry they want to be in. What would you say to them for them to continue their path to find success and happiness in the music industry?
Find people to play music with. Form a band. I think power comes out of doing something before you think about somebody else giving you the means to do it.
Yeah.
First of all, you have to connect. You have to realize that what your skill level is, and what you have to work on and what you don't have to work on. And realize that you can put yourself in situations purposely that will lead you in the path you want to go. So to find your own muse and find your own direction to contribute and give yourself the power to really bring the music to the highest level it can be. So when you walk on stage, you pay attention to everything that's happening. You're listening. You're not, if you're a drummer, you're not just so concerned about the groove and you're not focused on the bass player. Or if you're a sax player, you're not just waiting for your solo, which a lot of people do. Said, okay, yeah, that's good, but it's my time to blow it out, shine, and then you play everything you've ever worked out, and it's all, crowd pleaser for as much as you can be. And so those are the most powerful bits, is to find your own connection with your instrument, and then find other people to play. And so a lot of times, the best, most logical outlet for that would be a school. And for a lot of us, I used to say that most of the jazz programs in the colleges are big band oriented, and that's very limiting. There aren't big bands traveling. It's such a I'm so glad I've had those experiences, and there's nothing like playing in a great big band. It has its own unique power, and that doesn't mean it has to be a particular style. It means that you're surrounded by a bunch of players that are on a particular level, and they're concerned about sounding good with each other. And there's an ensemble level, so you learn about how your instruments match up. If you're a drummer, you learn how your kit, the difference in kits, and how the choices you make will matter big time to somebody. If you're playing a ride behind a jazz soloist, there's very specific ride sounds that that propel the music forward. And to listen to certain players and be inspired by that. That combination of being inspired, finding your own ability, connecting to your instrument, finding other musicians to connect with, and then the idea that you connect as a band to an audience, and then it's the whole ball of wax.
Boy, fantastic advice to create that sound of oneness.
Yeah.
That you're all on the same page.
Yeah.
Fantastic, fantastic advice. I'll tell you something. You really have set a standard and continue with this standard as a musician, as a person, as a leader in the music industry. We thank you so much on behalf of the Sessions, Brandon. It is so great. You are doing fantastic.
Thank you, Dom.
Thank you so much.
Great to talk.